Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking more about tissues, in particular connective tissues. In the last video we talked about how tissues are made up of similar cells that work together to perform a certain function. And if you remember, there are four main types of tissues: epithelial, connective, muscular, and nervous. And the last video talked a lot about epithelial tissues and how they form sheets that cover and line organs. Today we're going to be talking about connective tissue. And as the name would suggest, connective tissue functions to connect together structures in the body and support the body. And just like when we talked about epithelial tissues, the structure of the connective tissue informs the function of that tissue. So what it looks like or how it's made influences what it does. So again, connective tissue connects and supports structures of the body. The definition of connective tissue are living cells in a non-living matrix. So this is very different than the epithelial tissue we already talked about. Remember, the epithelial tissue was a cell attached to another cell, attached to another cell, attached to another cell. They would all sort of line up and be stuck together and form sheets of tissue that would cover and line things. So connective tissue is quite different. It has a very different structure. And that structure is that there are some living cells spread about, but the majority of the tissue is what we call a non-living matrix. So this might be fibers, this might be calcium, this might be water. Here's a picture of a generalized type of connective tissue. And you can see that there are a number of cells spread out in here. And they're sort of loose and disorganized. They're not at all like the epithelial tissue that we already looked at. Everything's sort of spread out compared to epithelial tissue. And around these cells, these connective tissue cells, is what we call the non-living matrix. So a lot of what makes up the non-living matrix are protein fibers. And there's actually three types of protein fiber. So the first type of protein fiber is collagen. And you can see collagen here in these sort of thick pink lines. Collagen fibers are strong but flexible. They're kind of like really big, thick ropes that hold together the connective tissue. The second type of fiber are reticular fibers, and you can see them down here, this sort of branching, very thin type of fibers that make a network. And they're good for sort of helping to maintain the shape and the integrity of a structure. And the last type of fiber would be these elastic fibers, and you can kind of see them. They're sort of medium fibers, and they have a lot of stretch to them. So if you pull on them and let go, they kind of recoil, and they help the tissue to go back to its original shape, almost like a rubber band. And all the different types of connective tissue are made up of different ratios of these types of fibers. So for example, one type of tissue might have a ton of collagen in it. And that would be something that's very, very strong and very, very sort of thick and able to resist a lot of stress. Something that has a lot of elastic fibers in it would have a lot of recoil and would be able to snap back into its original shape. And maybe that type of tissue doesn't have much collagen and doesn't have much reticular fibers. And so again, by changing the ratio and how much of each of these type of fibers are in your connective tissue, we're changing the function. So again, the structure, what it's made of, is going to influence the function, what it does. Now, just like epithelial tissues, there's a lot of different types of connective tissue, but we only have to learn 5 types of connective tissue in this class. So the first type of connective tissue that we're going to learn about is dense connective tissue. Dense connective tissue has a lot of those really thick, strong collagen fibers, and that gives dense connective tissue a lot of strength, but it also makes them kind of less flexible than other types of connective tissues. You would find dense connective tissue, an example of it, in your tendons and ligaments. And remember that tendons are going to connect muscles to a bone, and a ligament is going to connect a bone to another bone. So you really want something that's really, really, really strong to hold those two structures together. And again, connective tissue, its entire job is to hold together parts of the body and support the body. Now, what's interesting about these tendons and ligaments is you're getting a lot of strength with that really thick collagen fibers. However, because it is so packed in there together, tendons and ligaments tend to have a poor blood supply. They don't have a lot of blood going to them. So that means when you tear a tendon or tear a ligament, so for example, the ACL in the knee, it's not going to heal very quickly because you're not giving it a lot of blood. It doesn't have nutrients and oxygen and all of those things to really repair that tissue. The next type of connective tissue is cartilage. And there's actually 3 different types of cartilage. And remember how I told you that we can have different amounts of these 3 protein fibers in there. So the first one you can actually see a picture of to the right here. And this is hyaline cartilage. And hyaline cartilage is very smooth and friction-free. And it really doesn't have a lot of fibers in it. A lot of it is just made up of matrix. And that gives you this smooth articulating surface. So you find hyaline cartilage on the ends of the long bones, and it helps to make up that friction-free surface of your large synovial joints. The second type is elastic cartilage. You'll see an example of this in the outer ear. If you pull your outer ear down and then let go, it's going to flip back up again. And if you do it 100 times, it'll flip back up 100 times. So this is very flexible and has a lot of recoil in it. So it has a lot of elastic fibers in it to help that structure sort of bounce back to where it is supposed to be. And fibrocartilage is going to have much more of a shock absorbing type of function. And you're going to find it in the knees and in between the intervertebral discs, and it's going to help to cushion some of that stress of walking and keeping the bones from kind of banging into each other. So this type of cartilage is very strong, but it's more flexible than bone. Bone has a completely solid matrix. Cartilage is solid, but it's a little bit more flexible than bone. So it can kind of, especially when things like the elastic or the fibrocartilage, you can get a little bit of compression of this type of cartilage. But unfortunately, cartilage also has a pretty bad blood supply. So again, if you tear the cartilage, like in the meniscus or in your intervertebral discs, it is very difficult for these tissues to heal properly. Our third type of connective tissue that we're going to talk about is bone. And bone is going to store calcium in the matrix. And you can actually see a micrograph of bone here. You can see the osteons. We're going to learn more about this in the next chapter, but you can see these are the little sort of holes where bone cells, osteocytes, live. In between the bone cells, you have that non-living matrix made out of calcium. Now, bone actually has an excellent blood supply. So down the middle of each of these osteons that kind of look like tree trunks is an open space where blood vessels and nerves run. And so bone actually has a lot of blood running through it, which is why if you break a bone, it heals relatively quickly. Like within 6 weeks of having a cast on it, your bone will heal. And there's 3 different types of cells that we will learn about. Osteoblasts build bone, osteoclasts break down bone, and osteocytes are actually the cells that you can see in here. They live in bone, and they're the mature bone cells. Our last 2 types of connective tissue are the blood and the lymph. In this type of connective tissue, the cells, the living cells, are the formed elements, the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets that are used for clotting. Non-living matrix is the plasma and the lymph. Within the plasma and the lymph, you're going to find a lot of water some dissolved gases, nutrients, some proteins, as well as waste. The job of both the blood and the lymph is transport. With these 5 types of connective tissue, we are able to connect and support the body. Dense connective tissue and cartilage both function to hold the body together. Bone, with its completely solid and rigid matrix, helps to support the body, keep us from being sort of just a mass of tissues laying on the ground. And blood and lymph, with their completely fluid matrix, help, even though they're not actually physically holding the body together, they are connecting together different systems in the body because we're using them to transport things from one area of the body, so for example, the respiratory system and the lungs, to the tissues. So again, we are supporting and connecting parts of the body. That's it for today. See you in class.